It was supposed to be a routine meeting. Another binder. Another set of charts. Another night of projected collapse. The year was 2009. America was in freefall. Banks were closing. Homes were lost. Confidence had vanished like steam from a broken pipe. And in the West Wing, behind closed doors, an economic rescue plan was being stitched together, not with thread, but with terms, loopholes, and language written by the very architects of the collapse. President Barack Obama sat at the head of the Situation Room table, listening. Everyone in the room spoke in numbers. Liquidity, derivatives, capital injections. There was a plan on the table, $700 billion worth of solutions. But to whom? And for what? As the final page turned, and advisors leaned back, expecting the signature, Obama stayed silent. He wasn't looking at the graphs. He was looking at the photos taped inside his leather briefing folder, photos of people. A single mother in Detroit, a retired veteran in Florida, a waitress in Nevada. Real Americans. And then he asked the question no one in the room was prepared to answer. What do we give Main Street? There was no answer. Only glances. That night, as the corridors of the White House quieted and most staffers went home, one light stayed on. Obama didn't sleep. He stayed in the map room, surrounded by drafts, pens, notes. On the last page of the proposed relief bill, he picked up a pen, not as a politician, but as a citizen, and wrote in the margins. Direct relief for homeowners. Student loan protections. Small business grants. Caps on executive bonuses. It wasn't part of the original plan. It wasn't expected. It wasn't even welcomed by some. But by morning, the plan had changed. And the room that once echoed with economic jargon now had a different sound, the uncomfortable silence of power being rerouted. This wasn't just a rescue. It was a redirection. And in that moment, a message was written not in policy, but in principle. Leadership doesn't ask what's easy. It asks what's fair. The storm outside wasn't just in the skies over Washington, it was everywhere. On the stock ticker in Times Square. In the foreclosure signs nailed into lawns across Ohio. In the pale silence of factories in Detroit. In the empty break rooms of startups in San Jose. And in the trembling voice of Denise M., a mother from Dayton, who had mailed the president a 3-sentence letter that would change the course of a nation. Inside the West Wing, tension hung like fog. The bailout briefing was ready, hundreds of pages thick, prepared by the brightest minds from the Treasury Department, National Economic Council, and seasoned Beltway veterans. It had been reviewed, polished, and re-reviewed. The logic was tight: stabilize the financial system first, and everything else would follow. But Barack Obama wasn't convinced. Not yet. The meeting in the Roosevelt Room was supposed to be final. Larry Summers, Tim Geithner, Rahm Emanuel, all seated, tired, confident. The PowerPoint clicker in hand. Graphs projected. Terms like systemic risk, liquidity injection, and too big to fail flew across the room like confetti at a wake. When they finished, there was a pause. Then, Obama spoke, not in economic jargon, but with a question. What happens to the people who didn't cause this crisis? There was no immediate answer. Not because they hadn't thought about it, but because they had assumed it wasn't the point of the briefing. That evening, the advisors went home. The West Wing dimmed. Only the resolute desk remained lit, surrounded by towers of binders and a single letter laid flat in the center. Denise's words, "Don't forget us. The banks have lobbyists. We just have you." Obama took off his jacket, hung it neatly, and rolled up his sleeves. He opened the package labeled Executive Summary. His eyes skimmed the polished language, the legal jargon, the footnotes, and he began to scribble. Not corrections. Redirections. First, he drew a line through a section that offered executive compensation guarantees. Next to it, he wrote in block letters, "No bonuses for failure." Then he turned to the mortgage foreclosure clause. It was vague, insufficient. He wrote, "Mandate temporary halts. Incentivize renegotiations." He flipped another page. Small businesses were a footnote. That footnote became a paragraph. Then a page. "If we're saving anyone," he murmured to himself, "we're saving everyone." Outside, Secret Service agents patrolled the cold White House lawn. Inside, one guard noticed something unusual, the light in the Oval Office still glowing at 3:12 a.m. The same light that had once kept FDR company in his darkest nights. The guard whispered to a colleague, "He's still in there. Writing something." By 4 a.m., the yellow legal pad was filled with margin notes, arrows, and underlined phrases. Obama leaned back, rubbed his forehead, and looked at the last line he had written, "This isn't a bailout. It's a reckoning." He didn't sleep that night. By sunrise, the altered version of the plan was printed, bound, and stamped "Revised Presidential Draft." When the team reconvened that morning, some were surprised. Others were annoyed. One advisor whispered to another, "He rewrote half of it." Rahm Emanuel flipped through the marked pages and muttered, "He rewrote the whole damn story." But none challenged him. Because when Obama entered the room, he didn't ask for applause. He simply said, "This is what we'll send to Congress. Make sure they see the new footnotes." That week, the revised Emergency Economic Stabilization Act was presented to Congress. And for the first time, the headlines didn't just mention bank relief, they spoke of mortgage freezes, small business grants, school aid, and healthcare funding for low-income families. The press tried to find who on the Economic Council had made the changes. The answer came quietly from an aide, "The president did." For Obama, it was never just about markets. It was about people. He understood that Wall Street might stabilize in spreadsheets, but Main Street only stabilizes when a father can keep his home and a mother doesn't have to explain to her child why they can't go back to their old school. That letter from Denise stayed on his desk for weeks. He would sometimes glance at it between briefings. Once, when asked by a journalist what had most influenced his decision-making during the crisis, he said, "A mother in Ohio reminded me who I work for." In that late night between two versions of a bailout, Barack Obama didn't just lead. He listened, and then rewrote the chapter himself. The West Wing was quiet, save for the low hum of printers and the occasional shuffle of papers. It was past midnight. Most of the staff had gone home. But in the Oval Office, a single lamp burned above the resolute desk. President Obama sat hunched over a thick binder, the final version of the emergency economic briefing. Everything had been calculated, negotiated, sealed. All that remained was his signature. And yet, he didn't reach for the pen. Instead, he stared at the cover page. Financial Stabilization Package, Final Draft. It was immaculate. Legal language wrapped in economic theory, backed by market forecasts, crafted by the sharpest minds in Washington and Wall Street. A triumph of precision. A monument to policy. But not, he feared, to people. He flipped to page 17. Bullet points outline direct assistance to banks, liquidity injections, debt guarantees. Pages 20 through 30 detailed provisions for credit markets, for large investment institutions, for the mechanisms that had, until recently, seemed untouchable. Obama leaned back, the chair creaking softly. He closed his eyes and heard voices, not from the halls of Congress, not from the echo chambers of news anchors, but from earlier that week in Indiana, in a Rust Belt town whose last factory had closed 10 months before. A woman with tears in her eyes had handed him a note after a town hall meeting. Her husband had been laid off. Her mortgage was 3 months past due. Her daughter was in college with no way to pay for next semester. There was no page in the binder for her. He took out a yellow legal pad. At the top, he wrote in all caps. "What about Main Street? What followed was a stream of ideas that didn't appear in the polished memo. Foreclosure mitigation. Small business stabilization funds. Direct assistance to working families. Not stimulus, but survival. By 2:47 a.m., the binder had been marked up, pages interleaved with notes, arrows, stars. And at the bottom of several sections, in bold red ink, one phrase appeared repeatedly. Rethink, who does this really help? The next morning, economic advisors entered the Roosevelt room expecting a photo op. Instead, they found the president already seated, the revised binder in front of him. He didn't wait for pleasantries. "Gentlemen," he began, "we're not signing this today." There was confusion. Protests. One aide whispered, "But Mr. President, the markets open in 90 minutes. Obama looked up. "And in 90 minutes, millions of Americans will still be waking up unemployed. If this plan only saves the banks, we've already failed." He began to lay out his revisions. Some in the room objected, it would spook the markets, it would delay relief. But Obama stood firm. "This isn't just about a rebound on Wall Street," he said. "It's about a family in Des Moines, a small shop in Atlanta, a teacher in Detroit. If they're not in the plan, then we've planned for the wrong crisis." Silence. Then, slowly, Secretary Geithner leaned forward. "We'll need to recalculate the allocations," he said. "Some provisions may need congressional amendments." Obama nodded. "Then let's start." The rewrite began not with policy, but with principle. What the public would later see as a stimulus package was, in its heart, a moral pivot, a decision that rescue meant more than stock tickers turning green. When the revised bill was announced, critics on cable news pounced. They called it a gamble. Too much for working-class relief. Not enough for investment protection. A betrayal of bipartisan agreement. But on a cold Tuesday morning, a single mother in Ohio opened her mailbox to find a mortgage reprieve letter. A coffee shop owner in Nevada received a bridge loan. A teacher in Milwaukee finally saw budget cuts reversed. They didn't know about the midnight edits. But they felt their effects. And in the days that followed, the same economists who once whispered warnings now admitted the shift had prevented the worst. Obama never bragged about the rewrite. In press briefings, he simply said the package reflected America's real priorities. But deep in a drawer of his private study, the yellow legal pad with "What about Main Street?" still sat, creased, ink-smudged, but untouched. Because sometimes, leadership isn't in the bold speech, or the headline moment. It's in the silent hours before dawn. When a pen rewrites not just policy, but purpose. The next morning, the Situation Room felt colder than usual, less because of the air conditioning and more due to the unspoken tension that always preceded high-stakes briefings. Cabinet members, top economic advisors, and seasoned political strategists shuffled into their seats. Some held folders, others tablets, but nearly all clutched assumptions about how this day would unfold. They were about to be wrong. Barack Obama entered with his usual calm, but today there was an edge to it, sharp, deliberate. He placed a marked-up copy of the bailout bill on the center of the table and sat, not at the head, but in a position where everyone could see the red ink bleeding through its pages. Larry Summers, economic advisor and former Treasury Secretary, was the first to speak. "Mr. President, the markets are expecting a vote in 72 hours. We've briefed the Hill. Any major rewrite now could spook investors." Obama raised a hand gently. "Then let them be spooked. If fear is the only reason they trust this bill, we've already failed." A murmur rippled through the room. Tim Geithner leaned forward. "We're trying to stabilize confidence. The structure we have." "I've read the structure," Obama interrupted. "I've also read the letters. From Michigan, from Arizona, from rural Illinois. People who lost homes, jobs, dignity. If this bill sails through and they're still drowning, we didn't rescue the economy. We just redecorated the top floor while the basement flooded. Rahm Emanuel cleared his throat. So, what exactly are we changing? Obama opened the document and began to list, calmly but with conviction. We're adding a moratorium on home foreclosures for at least 6 months. That's non-negotiable. He flipped a page. Student loan forgiveness, partial, but immediate, for public service graduates. They carried us through this recession, it's time we carried them. Another page. A direct stimulus to low-income families. Tax relief for those making under $50,000. We'll delay hedge fund carve-outs to pay for it. Jason Furman shifted uneasily. Sir, Wall Street's response could be brutal. They'll say it's anti-market. Obama's eyes locked onto his. And what will Main Street say? That we finally remembered them? Let them say that. Some leaned back, digesting the seismic shift. Others leaned in, already calculating the political fallout. But no one left untouched. Valerie Jarrett, quiet until now, finally spoke. You understand this will be the headline? President overrides Treasury plan. The opposition will call it reckless. Obama smiled faintly. Let them. Leadership isn't a mirror, it's a compass. I didn't come here to reflect fear. I came to redirect power. There was a silence that lasted longer than anyone expected. It wasn't disagreement, it was recognition. A tectonic plate beneath Washington had just shifted. By noon, word leaked to the press. Obama demands middle-class relief in bailout package. Cable news panels exploded. Pundits frothed over the political implications. Republicans called it overreach. Some Democrats panicked. The markets dipped 300 points in 30 minutes. But something else happened too. Outside a fire station in Ohio, firefighters stood watching CNN and quietly nodded. In South Carolina, a laid-off teacher posted the story on Facebook with the words, "Finally." In Chicago, a woman who had lost her home wrote in her journal, "He didn't forget us." This wasn't optics. It was oxygen. That evening, when Obama returned to the residence, Michelle was waiting with that look, the one that could melt or disarm a continent. "I saw the news," she said. "You disagree? I think you just made it harder for everyone else to ever say, we didn't know better." He chuckled, removed his jacket, and poured them both tea. "I'm not trying to be a hero." "I know," she replied. "That's why it matters." The next day, when the revised package was delivered to Congress, it arrived with a handwritten note on the first page. This plan does not only rescue numbers. It rescues lives. If that makes it controversial, so be it. Let's debate dignity. Let's vote on justice. Barack H. Obama. Some members of Congress refused to read beyond that. Others read it twice. The briefing he rewrote didn't just change a bill. It rewired how power was used. It reminded Washington that the economy isn't a graph, it's a grocery store receipt, a rent notice, a college rejection letter written in the fine print of poverty. That ripple. It never stopped. It traveled into town halls, kitchen tables, campaign speeches, even into the next president's inbox. And somewhere, in a small house with a foreclosure notice ripped off the door, a mother told her kids they could sleep soundly again. Because someone, once, remembered to write them in.
If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories that move the world. Thanks for watching.